Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Rollwise podcast. My name is Mike, one of your hosts, and I'm joined by my two good friends. Today, we're going to be talking about the second part of the Game Master's Guide to Proactive Role Playing. I'd show you my cover, but
I was gonna say, I thought you were gonna.
yeah, here's the cover. Regrettably, not only is it a good read, but it's very tasty, as my dog has decided. So, made a homebrew fix to it, and now it looks like it's treasure or battle tested or something. I'm not really sure.
Battle tested. I like to consider it battle tested.
Battle tested. So using my battle tested copy, we're going through the part 2, creating a proactive world, which is 3 parts: locations, conflicts, and rewards. So this was actually kind of an interesting, I guess for me, this was pretty good. And I think starting with locations, because you guys, when you went to MizCon, you guys talked about the dark wood and everything like that. I thought that was a kind of complimentary to this conversation. Plus, as I was reading the locations chapter, I actually started, thinking about some of our previous adventures that we had run. And actually, I had some insights as to maybe why one of our adventures wasn't so good. So, or at least maybe where I could have done better on the adventure. How about that? So what did you guys think? Starting with locations, what was some stuff that you liked when you got into that?
I think it's good overall. I think one of the like defining thing that they're talking about is making the locations important to the player's goals.
Mm-hmm.
Which I think it's real easy for you to throw a location in there because you think it's cool, and then it feel not associated with what's going on. And I think that's what they're really suggesting avoiding is, don't just think of a place that's cool. Think of a place that's cool and ties into kind of what you've been doing, what your characters are doing or want to do.
Sure.
There should be a reason to go there.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's actually one of the parts that I highlighted is that, the quote that coming from here is that don't come up with a cool idea and then attach a quest to it later, because, it won't lead to emotionally invested players, but instead they want you to work backwards, analyze the player goals, figure out what's satisfying to the conclusion of their efforts, and design something around that. Mm-hmm. And I think that's interesting to me because when we did our Fabula Ultima game, I had gone around and this is something I had read in another blog, is I basically said, okay, well, let's design the world around the players to be like a sandbox and everything like that. So mechanically interesting areas and everything like that were very cool to me, especially as I went through the design process of, kind of littering it out. I think the analogy that was used at the time is like you're making a pizza. These little islands that are the pepperoni represent nodes of interesting topics and everything like that for you to do. But that's kind of where it ends, because if me as the game master failed to design anything that was of interest to your characters, I've just done a lot of work. not a lot of reward. So that's I like that point that they bring up kind of in the part there too. Jeff, what about you, man? So locations are an interesting place for players to play in, but what did you feel like was a good takeaway from that chapter?
It's like the rest of the book. Your initial thought probably isn't the thing that you want, and you probably need to break it down and reverse it and work backwards, because you've got to get the characters emotionally invested. Mm-hmm. Like, how many times have we been playing in a game and we're in a town and the GM's like, oh, you guys need to do this or some bad thing's going to happen to the town. And it's like, we just got here. Other than our alignments, generally making us not wanting the town to be sacked immediately upon our leaving, why should we get involved in the affairs of what's going on? You know what I mean? Like, that's really what this whole book is about, right? Is increasing the engagement of the players and the settings, having a reason. Somebody's hometown, somebody's family member lives there, the NPC lives there. The characters go, this is a beautiful place and it's central to everywhere we want to explore, and we're going to establish a base here. Mm-hmm. And they make it their home. Things like that make the players care about the setting, and it's not just, oh, hey, generic fantasy town, we'll visit the inn, we'll visit the bar, and we'll visit the merchants, and then we'll leave. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yep. No, I totally get it. And I feel like I feel like something that happens kind of on accident is that when you're going through the town, like the players never seem to be as interested in the town, but this random NPC you make up on the spot and the players just have fun with tends
Well,
to
they
be the
interact with
biggest.
the NPC, right?
Yeah, they interact with them. They have, fun. They invest some time into that interaction. All of a sudden that NPC becomes, it goes from like, I hate to call it a throwaway NPC, but somebody you just made up on the spot becomes more important to your game than all of the extra work that you put into the town.
Yeah, but I think that organic stuff is good. Like I think in by anchoring an emotion to that character, even if it's random, that's what makes the town interesting. Now the town's important because we have to protect, you know,
Boblin, as they
Bob the Goblin. Now we have to protect Bob the Goblin, and this is his town.
Yeah.
We have to save Bob the Goblin's home.
Mhm.
So I think that's the one thing that I worry that might get taken away from this a little bit is like if you plan everything, you're not going to have as much of that organic growth of like the town's interesting now because of this person.
Mhm.
Which leads me to my other point. One of the things that I would caution people against is trying to make every single town that the players go through be one of these towns. Like you're linked to every single because like I was thinking about me like being on a road trip or whatever. Is like how many towns do I go through that I don't care about at all and shouldn't because they're not a part of the story that I'm living. So I would worry that somebody might read this and think every town that they ride through needs to be linked to something that they're doing. And I don't remember if they mentioned that or not, but that would be the one thing that I worry about because you get that in your mindset. You're like, oh, I want this whole adventure to be engaging. And so it's just really easy to think every town that they go to is going to be a part of this meta plot.
Well, and I think so. There is a conundrum that they present, and I don't think they realize or recognize that it's presented as a conundrum because the whole point about making the game about proactive role playing and kind of giving the steering wheel to the players to kind of drive the plot and everything like that, by default, I think causes the world to revolve around them much more than say a quote unquote canned adventurer or like an open world or something like that. Because there are 2 points that I would make here is that the first thing is that if everything that you're trying to do intersects with the character's goals, that means that everything that they're going to run into has something to do with something they're going to do. So it's hard. And so it's like, how interesting is it for you to be like, okay, well, there are 3 towns for you to explore. Here are your character goals. And then me as the game master go, okay, well, none of these towns intersect with any of their goals. So we go to the town. Oh, the town is really cool. And you get pickpocketed. Ah, crap. Now I have to go on this really weird tangential adventure to go get the thing back that has nothing to do with anything we were doing before. And while fun and could, last for an adventure, it just, the purpose of the book seems to be to drive things around their player goals. So it's like, how do you divorce that a little bit to make the world feel bigger than just them?
Right. Yeah. Because you're going to run into that kind of like video game RPG problem where it feels like everybody's just waiting around everyone's kind of just waiting around to talk to the PCs because everything does revolve around them. And that's kind of what I mean by there has to be small towns that they pass through that don't matter. Like where maybe something does happen or maybe something doesn't. But like think of that time you go through a small town and you just stop at the gas station and leave. Like you're not anchored to that place at all, but it's still part of the story.
Yeah.
And I could see somebody reading this and being like, oh, that small town needs to have something, a hint or a clue or something to their overall goal. And it's like, no, it doesn't. Because if you do that, your characters aren't people anymore. They're chosen, like they're godlings that are chosen to warp the world around them. Which if that's a story that you want to tell, that's cool. But if you're just trying to make an interesting story about adventurers, like I said, you're gonna get like NPCs that feel like they're standing around waiting for the players to show up.
And this is one thing that I think they brought up. I don't think they brought up in the locations chapter. I think it was actually in the next chapter in the conflict or something like that. But one of the things that was interesting to me is that like they do kind of hit on that just a little bit. They basically say there are things because there are things that you want your players to engage with in terms of locations and places where they make changes that happen. So what do I mean by that? I mean, okay, so you save, or so let's say, you go out and you're adventuring and you see, a war band of goblins that come, that seem like they're on their way to the village. And you tell the village, well, now you've told the village and they build up bulwarks and defenses and everything like that against the goblin raiders. So that's something that you've done. But what I did like too is that they also suggest doing things that are changing the world around them that aren't player driven necessarily. And so, like, these are the things that are happening without your intervention. And that's why I kind of like the random tables in Dragonbane, is that, there are certain times, like when you guys come back to Outskirt or something like that, I roll on a random table to see if there's anything cool or interesting that's happening that's not necessarily related to what you're doing. And that's just to give the town depth, flavor, and uniqueness. And of course, because it's a roll, it doesn't require me to come up with every cool side thing that makes the world alive, because I mean that can be a little bit exhausting from a DM perspective.
But, and that's kind of what I'm talking about, like that idea that when you come back into the town, something may have happened, like somebody may have stole a sack of flour or whatever, like that sort of thing, like it's the sort of thing that makes the world feel more full. And that's kind of what I'm talking about, is that those moments where it's like, oh, these NPCs are kind of just waiting for us to show up. And that's kind of the stuff that you want to avoid.
Yeah. You have to be strategic. Like that's the thing I kept thinking when Brent was making his point. Like, you can't invest that in everywhere the party stops or everywhere they go. Some places are just waypoints, right? Spot to water the horses, a spot to get a bite of food, and then you're on your way. There may not be any interactions, even with the NPCs. They may not be all that interesting, but you've got to pick your spots. And when you pick your spots and you do the things like you've been talking about that help the characters feel invested in the location, I think it has a real impact, especially when it's not happening all the time, right?
Yeah. Like any literary tool, if you do too much, if you overuse it, it just becomes background noise. It just becomes, oh, this town is the second secret cult town we've found. Because so you just have to be aware of that.
Well, and I think people like, when you do this, there is probably a way that it makes it a little bit easier for your character, because like a short-term goal is my short-term goal is to make it to Midway, the small village between Boar's Head and or whatever place, like if you're Midway, the goal literally could be, we need to go there and resupply, and basically I'm just there to resupply everything. Like, and then there's downtime, because I think that one thing people probably don't invest as much time in, at least as much as I've seen from playing all that stuff, everyone's interested in the meat, but they're not interested in the side salad, if that makes sense. The downtime, some groups probably play a lot with that, but our group doesn't tend to dally a lot in downtime and all that kind of stuff. And that could be just because of how I pace the games, or because we do shorter adventures and stuff like that. But downtime just doesn't play a big part. But I think if you have downtime, locations that are less crucial to the story become much more interesting, is because then you can pick up resources, or you can find information about the region that may not be necessary, but you can find out, like, oh, this area is actually a good iron mine. Well, in 5 sessions when I need a good iron mine, I know that Midway has an iron mine that I can remember if I really care to.
I don't necessarily think that's true. I think we use downtime fairly well in the Pathfinder game. I don't think we use downtime. I don't think. Brent. Well, no, I mean, I think we all did to a degree. Like there was the spying and the shop and the going to the shops and stuff like that, and we all kind of did that in different parts, planning the orchard. And then, but like Dragon's Bane feels kind of like, it feels almost like we're on a clock, to talk about our current game. So it doesn't feel like the downtime. It feels like there's something we have to get to is the thing. With the Pathfinder game, there was obvious breaks in the story, where it's like, oh, we did a thing. We have time now where we can do stuff before we go do a thing.
Yeah. Oh, more of what I was trying to say is that, like, we just don't play long campaign style games as much anymore. We tend to play shorter adventures, so it's just not as big of a component for us. But I'm sure in larger campaigns, as Brent was saying, is that, like Brent was trying to, establish a thieves guild. kind of barring the fact that there were already thievy type people in the town of Alkenstar. He was doing his own to kind of like make his mark on the world, and that's interesting in those kind of things that he was able to pursue, and I think that adds a touch of flair to it. More my point is that kind of downtime for those midpoints, those gas station stops, let's call them, I think that's where you can find more interesting components to it than saying like, oh, Midway also happens to be a cult base.
But I don't think it, but see what I'm saying is especially if you're doing a quest where it's like we're going out and questing, I think if you do that too much, that's especially what I'm talking about, because like those, you're going to pass through a lot of those towns if you're going from here to there. And if you make every one of those little towns that they pass through, and you do like, you have a significant event in every one of those towns, like the towns, it's going to get old.
Oh, no.
It may be interesting, but it's going to get old, I think.
Well,
that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying putting events.
And the reason that we could use downtime better in the Pathfinder game is because we were just in the one city, like, and that allowed us to have a home where we could do downtime is kind of so that's what made it easier to use downtime, I think, in that game. Just a point.
And some of our goals were like in Alkenstar to find out information, and so the goals tied to the place, right? Instead of the place just being a place where stuff happens, it was a place where we were making things happen that furthered our goals. And I think that's one of the keys. One of the things that I liked in the chapter was they were like, the wilderness, like, it's not a town. There aren't NPCs. There aren't. You're not going to find the Assassin's Guild. Well, maybe the Assassin's Guild you'll find stumbling around the woods, but you can still make it an interesting place that ties in with the player's goals.
Yeah,
depending on what they are. Not every time, but sure. But I think it's possible, and I thought that was neat.
Like more to, I guess I'm kind of misconstruing your point. The point that I'm trying to make is that I worry that somebody reads this, gets excited about running a game after reading it, and then decide every single town the adventurers come in is going to be linked to everything. Yeah, and that's going to be rough.
No. I 100% agree with you on that part.
and that's not what I'm trying to say. I'm just trying to say is if you are going to include those kind of waypoints, make them so that they have resources or something unique about them that is memorable, but don't make them necessarily intersect with every thing.
Exactly.
Like your long-term goal is literally just resupply. Like that's
Bob the Goblin.
Yeah, you go to the general store, you get some tack, and then you reshoe your horses and you get out of town. Like that's it. Like you just
exactly. Yeah.
But one thing, so kind of but I think Brent, you have made an excellent point, and so I don't think that that's wrong to think that like if everything is always mattering, then you're always too high of tension. Like you have to have you have to literally have that climax curve and stuff like that. So
and then it also
something and then go down.
It also just doesn't feel like a living world. It feels like everyone's a mannequin until the player characters get into town and.
Yeah,
then
sitting
the
animatronics.
The animatronics start up and they interact with the characters.
Yeah,
which I think is funny because this book is all about trying to make a world that feels living, like a character and world that feels living, and I think that's something that could be heavy. You could be heavy-handed with, and
if you take it too far,
the absolute opposite of what you're trying to do.
Yeah, well, and you're trying to make it engaging for the people so that they're interested in pursuing their goals. And
because, even like Brent said, I'm the type of person that if everything is here, if everything's at a 10, like everywhere there's something happening, then eventually, if everything's important, eventually nothing's important. And then that's when I'm like, oh, you wind up on these stupid side quests that don't mean anything. You know what I mean? Where you're like, there has to be something with that canyon. They kept telling us there was nothing there.
Yeah, obviously the locals are trying to lead us astray by just saying this is just a windy canyon. Why is it windy? Why is it sighing?
That's probably more of a problem with me as a player. But you do anything too much, it causes all kinds of problems.
Yeah, well, that's kind of more the meta in us, right? Where the metagaming comes from. You're like, obviously it was described. What's so special about it? It's got to be important in some way. Now, one of the sections in the location place that I thought was interesting is that they talk about player bases. And and player bases are kind of an interesting thing for me because I feel like player bases done right are really fun, but I also feel like they can just feel like a weird add-on. Now, in terms of like my own personal perspective of the player bases, I love players having a place where that's where their downtime takes place, or where they can expand it, or have because that's a control over the world in longer play and everything like that. So in this one, they suggest that like player bases are like a reward, but in Vaesen, actually a player base is given kind of upfront. Do you feel like the investiture that you make, if it's given up front in that kind of situation, is as great as if you've earned it as part of play?
I do.
Yeah.
Because I think your player place, like the place, player place, sure, that's what I'm saying. Player place. I think that almost becomes a character in its own right.
Mm-hmm.
Like I really enjoyed, like, and this wasn't even intention in the Pathfinder game, but when we could go back to the Pathfinders Guild and like have our meetings and stuff like that felt perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And like, when we didn't really earn that per se, and it wasn't really ours, but we definitely were using it as such.
Mm-hmm.
And I think those places are important, and it's a place where, like I could see giving it as a reward being like a big deal, especially if your players that are, like, traveling a lot. Like I could see that as a milestone that you can set up for your players, either giving them a bigger one or something like that. But it's just nice because that's the one place that you players know, okay, I'm probably safe here. And then you can screw them later. But for now, it's like, oh, this is a place where I'm safe, and we can have the meetings that all player groups have, and not worry about being in the tavern. Which is nice, which is one of the things I liked about it. But I could see it being more rewarding, like earning it, but I could also see it being hard. Like it's hard to imagine. Like it's hard to be the group of adventurers that camps out in the woods every night. Like it's hard to feel like those people. Yeah,
like you just don't
to imagine.
Sure. And Jeff, what about you, man? Earn versus given, like right at the beginning. Thoughts?
Well, with Vaesen specifically, it's given to you, but it's kind of bare bones and basic. It has basic stuff, but then there's a mechanism in the game where you can actually upgrade it. And so at the end of every, they call them adventures. What do they call them?
Investigations.
Investigation.
Yep.
Yeah, there we go. At the end of every investigation, you got to make it better and get things, and it helped. I felt invested in the place. Like we were having some like lively debates over, well, what should we do? We have this many points. How do we spend them? And I think we all, agreed, and there was some sharing and push and pull, but I think all of us were invested in it. It was kind of a cool mechanism. So whether it's gifted or it's somebody's ancestral home or, whatever, I think you technically earn it either way, by willing to be taking on these investigations and become a member of this society, or you do a great deed for the kingdom and the guy gives you this, some barn on a minor outbuilding, you can hang out in. It's your clubhouse, right?
Yep.
Like we all had those places as kids. Like it always takes me back, like, because in my head, all those clubhouses were magical, right? They were way cooler than under the limbs of the tree in the woods. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. No, and it's interesting because it does provide an extra dynamic. And to Brent's earlier point, that what I thought was really fun is that in Alkenstar there was a sequence of events that happened that basically caused them to have to go on the run. And the first thing that happened, obviously, was the city guard, bust into the Pathfinder Society lodge that we had built together, and these guys became outlaws. And it was just you could tell because you could see, like, I could hear as everyone was going through this, they're like, oh crap, they're coming for us. And then everyone's like, well, why are they coming for us? And everyone's, invisibly they turned their head to one of our players because they knew exactly why they were coming for them. It was an amazing sequence of events that I think had a good emotional, like, like everyone was just like, F, because they knew the outcome, they knew the stakes, and then that turned into, everyone escaping for their lives and scattering into the wind,
Yeah. But in like Vaesen, like to Jeff's point, like
Mhm.
in Vaesen, and I think Coriolis has this to a degree, and those games where base building is kind of a part of it, like they become part of your reward. Like instead of just
Mhm.
leveling up yourself, you level up your
Mhm.
establishment as well.
Mhm.
So then, and that has an impact, and that again adds value because that place becomes part of your, it is part of your story. So
Yep.
yeah,
And it also can help you investigate too. Like it actually, like there are mechanical advantages as well as
right.
cool, like
Yeah.
cool investitures
It's,
that you get just for having a cool base and everything.
it's
Now,
just, I'll
obviously,
make us go ahead. Sorry, Mike.
I
Go
was
ahead.
just gonna say, now obviously, in this one you don't really design the place per se, but like I have a feeling that there are a lot of groups where they get a sort of base that like one of the players or a couple of the players really go to town, like just putting all the
Mhm.
details, mapping it out, showing everything up.
Well,
People
yeah,
had a lot of fun doing that.
that's one of those things to steal, right? Like that's one of
Mhm.
those things you steal from Vaesen or whatever. Is you steal that and you say, oh well, we're gonna make we're gonna make our little adventure fortress, and like
Mhm.
that's like something that you steal is like if you want, you can steal that mechanic and then put it in another game and be like, okay, this is XP you earned just to make your hideout better or whatever.
Yeah.
And I think that's a cool idea. So.
Yeah. So, so the location chapter, honestly, I think it did kind of let me look retrospectively at some of the stuff that I've run in the past and give me some ideas as to how I could run those better, by more closely aligning like player goals and outcomes and like why something matters to them, because they could matter at some point in the game, but just
Mhm.
how do I make them more apparent to mattering now rather than just a slog to get through and all that stuff.
Mhm.
But are you guys okay to move on to the next one, conflict?
Sure.
Yeah.
Always,
So
Let's hit the conflict chapter.
always willing to talk about conflict.
yeah, so conflict, I thought this was interesting in this because conflict is basically, I mean, everyone knows what conflict is, and tabletop RPGs are chock full of conflicts, usually of the sword and sword and magic and fighting kind. But they suggest, going through conflict as that is a possible outcome, but they did suggest other ones. And what they did is they made a very intentional choice to not include all types of conflict, mostly just the social type conflicts and fighting type conflicts and everything like that. But the thing that they kind of preface this with is that you can create satisfying conflicts, and this is a quote, by focusing not on the battle itself, but on the stakes the battle represents. So when you're designing these, they should have three things to keep in mind: the motivation of the player characters, the motivations of the forces opposing them, and what the winning of the conflict means. So tell me a little bit about your guys' thoughts on that. Do you think that when you're running games and everything like that, stakes are usually represented in those games? Or how do you think that affects your play when the stakes are muddy? Those are two very different questions, I guess. So let's start with the first one. Do you think that stakes are typically represented in the conflicts that you experience in your games?
Yes, I do feel like there's usually stakes when you're in conflict with somebody.
Mhm.
One, I mean, one of the things that I think is interesting is basically anytime you find yourself in conflict in real life or in a game, there is some sort of stakes. It's usually, do I get what I want, or does this person get what they want? Like usually, it's like tug of war.
Mhm.
Very rarely is it ever going to be like an example of something that isn't a conflict would be going into a merchant and buying something. Like that's that's conflict without like there's an outcome, but there's no real conflict there. It's like I have
There could be. Yeah.
unless you want to like negotiate, and
Mhm.
then you're doing conflict, and then there's an obvious like outcome that you're looking for.
Mhm.
But if there's not, like it's just it's either a conversation or like a transaction. Like, and
Yeah.
those don't, yeah.
Okay. And Jeff, what about you? Do you think that you feel like you've been pretty lucky in terms of stakes being apparent in the games,
Well,
or do you feel like sometimes you run into conflict that don't have stakes that you're aware of?
I think for the most part there's some, because even if I'm unaware of one, like we get surprised by somebody, like there's the chance of the character dying. Like those are
Mhm.
stakes, right? Or there's a chance of doing something illegal in town, and those are stakes. Like I think with most conflicts there are some sort of stakes,
Mhm.
even if they're just very basic. I think the better defined they are, again, increases that investiture from the player's perspective, from the character's perspective, to want to pursue after that conflict is resolved, to try to resolve whatever greater conflict that was representing. You know what I mean? Because some things are one-offs, but some things are part of a path of progression till some ultimate end.
True.
And if I'm invested in some way, then I want to see this path through to the ultimate end. And if I'm not, as a character, then I want to go do something else that I am invested in.
Yeah, no, I feel like that's the one thing that kind of as I was reading through this, and I was reminded about even the Age of Worms game and everything like that. Sometimes the stakes in the fight where you get to the next room, or you get to explore a room, or you get to you save your skin, like that. It seems very like low level and repetitive, I guess. It doesn't seem like super high level stakes. And I'm curious because it feels like, going back on some adventures, that represented a lot of different conflict, is that like the conflict simply exists so that you can explore a room. And as adventurers, you want the loots, so take the thing that is hiding your loots out of the picture.
Well, yeah, but it's just that thing though, is conflict doesn't have to be complicated. Like I said, usually it comes down to, I want something and you don't want me to have it, or you want to keep it, or something of that nature. And that's like the basics of all conflict. Like and then how we get there is the part that's interesting. Like how much do they want to keep it? Do they want to keep it enough to fight me about it? Are they willing to negotiate for it? That sort of thing. And I think that's the part you have to remember. It's like, conflict is apparent, like readily available anywhere. Like you can like I said, you can go into a merchant's place and cause conflict. Like you can go in and be like, I want this item and I want it for $1.
Yeah. Well, and what's interesting about this is that, kind of outside of the merchant negotiation and everything like that, they did provide a way to help guarantee fights, help reduce the level of outcome for a fight, and gave you different objectives, so that you could have like goal oriented conflicts instead of just swords and clashing sword level conflict. So did you, as you were reading that, I felt that the like if your characters aren't fighting stuff enough, or you're not fighting the group that you want them to fight, they were like, okay, well, if you feel like they should be going and being a murder hobo a little bit, you can ratchet it up in the following ways. And like one of the examples was, strengthen the opposing faction's ideological commitment to their goal, religious or otherwise. Weaken the opposing faction's position relative to rivals, making them more desperate. And I was like, oh, that's it. Because I think that's the first time I've actually seen somebody, and there may be groups out there that experience this. I think when I was watching the video from JDD, they had of somebody that they had talked about that, like, they never got into fights, and I was like, wow, that would be very different for our group to like just every encounter. How do we not get into a fight here?
We do that a lot. We do that a lot as a group, though.
I know, but like no fights whatsoever, that seems hard.
Well, right. Well, the reason that most groups fight is because violence is the easy option, right? Like, why talk this person out of it when I could just punch them and take what I want? Like, that's what usually that's what it comes down to.
Yeah.
Well, to go back, I think you have to have a lot of GM involvement, because I think that has to be a group that says we want armed combat as a last resort, or we don't want it at all. The GM has to be complicit in that, because like when we were doing Age of Worms and when we were in the Whispering Cairn, and the first thing that happens is we get attacked by wolves. Like, we didn't do anything to cause the wolves to attack us other than be there. They run faster than us. We can't get away. They're attacking us. What are your options? Like, you can't have that set up for that group where they don't have any armed conflict.
Right. Like, and I guess I'm a little confused, because like, you can make a group have to fight somebody. Like, there's plenty of ways to do that, and it's not like. So I'm surprised that they felt like they needed to explain that a little, because like, There's all sorts of ways. Like you just put in an obstacle that they can't negotiate with. Like like make them undead. Like you can you can't negotiate with these guys because they don't. Their purpose is whatever. Like stop you from going in there. It sounds like this what. And I don't know if they had an example. I don't remember if they had an example or not of that situation. But like the fact is, it sounds like there was either a really political game or something very humanized that they wanted to have a fight in, and they couldn't force it. Like they couldn't do that. They like, oh well, they're an undead monster. You have to fight them.
Yeah.
Like you know, and like and for frankly, if that's the type of game that you're playing, I think it's cool that your characters never. That means they're outsmarting the adventure. Really, is what it comes down to. And I think
It's
that's
true.
probably where the GM's getting upset. It's like I'm getting outsmarted on all of these things,
Maybe.
and I want them to fight something. And
You
I
know,
think because I think if your players want to negotiate with everyone or talk people out of fighting, like what a novel concept. Like how often does that happen in gaming? Like you should be proud of that gaming group, because
you should be.
There's not very many groups that do that.
Yeah. Well, at least in my opinion, there are a lot of groups that see that group of goblins and they may pull their swords first and ask questions later. And I have some experience with that myself and regretted the pulling sword first approach.
Well, we've always been part of of that. Like you know, like you never expect the gentleman spider that you start just running an attack. Oh, well, you should have known because he was wearing a top hat. What? Like
yeah. Oh, that trapdoor spider, that was just the door to his house.
yeah, he just wanted to have a talk with you. What are you talking about? Like, and if the players thought that when they entered the spider's lair, like that would be amazing.
That's true.
Let's try and talk to it. Oh, okay.
Speak with animals. You know, some people play druids. Not many,
Yeah.
but some people play druids.
It's true.
Or people with access to that spell.
And Bob the druid would have the most purpose then.
Yeah. Well, so it is interesting though, but on the flip side of that, if you do have a party that does resort to violence a lot more, they do give 4 suggestions, you know, such as if you want more non-common encounters, simply reduce the party's access to violence. And this is kind of interesting from like a in Cosmere, what I was learning about Cosmere, because I haven't learned a lot about it, but I've learned a little bit in anticipation of kind of like the setting and everything, is that like inside cities, people don't tend to just walk around with weapons of war. And if I'm wrong on that, I apologize. I'm a novice when it comes to this, but it sounds like cities are more civilized locations and people don't just go around with weapons strapped to their hips or in full armor without getting strange looks and possible, you know, harassment from the authorities. You know what I'm saying? It's just not what's done. So I think that would be a way that, you know, people would be less likely to seek violence if you have their weapons or armor stripped away from them and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, you have to think about it more like a modern setting. Like Unknown Armies is a great quote in the very first edition book that's just like, if someone pulls a gun, it's a big deal. And there will probably be cops involved and people will be going to jail. So sometimes violence isn't the best option. And so that's what you got to think about. You got to think it more modernly. Like if you're a bunch of murder hobos, like what are the consequences of them deciding to just break in the door and beat the shit out of the thieves guild, like, or murder a few or kill a few of them? Like what's the consequences of that? It's, oh, well, the city guard is going to come and kick open our door and beat the shit out of us and maybe murder a few of us. Like you have to have consequences for overusing violence, and they have to be aware of them.
Yeah. And one of them that I thought was interesting that is that, and Jeff, I'd be curious on your thoughts here, is that one of them, it says, is make the death of the opposing side inconsequential, meaning that if, you know, like so for example, let's say I think one of the things that they had is like, let's say there's a demonic ritual that's taking place. You killing a cultist doesn't stop the ritual. The ritual still proceeds. So is that necessarily the best approach to stopping the ritual that has other goals or factors that, you know, stop it from taking place? Do you think that's how do you think about that type of approach to reducing conflict?
I think it could work. Like we've seen it in movies, right? Like wasn't one of the Indiana Jones movies, didn't he have to stop some sort of a ritual? And obviously you couldn't kill everybody in there, but you find other ways to do things that maybe involve some combat but not death. um I think it happens. I mean, I certainly think it's a method. I don't know whether every group, because I know groups that are like, well, killing one won't stop the ritual, but killing all of them will definitely stop the ritual. And then then it's a question of, well, you've got 5 party members. Can you kill 100 cult members that are all here armed to the teeth?
Well,
I don't know.
And then you run into that problems where it's like, what do we do? Okay, so we're breaking into the palace, right? And sure, killing that one cult member is not going to stop the ritual, but it might stop him from stabbing you in the back while you're stopping the ritual. So you also have to like make it clear, like there has to be a clear way you could get rid of a threat if you don't want to just murder hobo everybody. Like you have to make it clear how you can get rid of a threat without killing them being the best option. Like, well, how do we make them not a threat anymore?
Yeah, you solve all your problems with a chainsaw. It's very hard to have a problem. It's an interesting conundrum because it's just like, well, how do you? I mean, sure, if your party wishes to engage us with the more violent tendencies and stuff like that, but the goal doesn't have anything to do with the number of cultists or anything like that because it's a time-bound ritual or something, something that's outside the cultists' control to a degree. Then I always find that to be an interesting thing because that time that you waste killing cultists could also mean that whatever ritual hits its success state, so therefore the players hit a fail state, like you now experience the consequences of the super uber demon being summoned because you were backstabbing cultists for the last 2 hours going around their compound.
Well, you can't just killing all of them, everyone. No, I agree with that, but I'm just saying, like, putting one behind you in a situation where there's going to be combat doesn't always sound like the best idea to players either. Sure. Like if you really want to stop them from doing something like that, and you're basically meta playing the game, like you need to make them like, oh, well, the cultists are all actually mind controlled, so they're actually innocent people.
Sure.
And then you'll probably get people to stop them from killing, just mass murdering cultists on the way there. Yeah. Maybe some parties that's a maybe.
I think we've all seen a lot of like hardcore parties that have been through a lot and are quick to anger, quicker to fight, kind of stuff, because that's kind of how you stay alive in a lot of these settings. Like in some of the more modern games, I think there's more things like Brent mentioned, you know what I mean? Like draw a gun, you can use it, you have one, but the cops are going to come, right?
The consequences are going
right, or this is happening in a public square and, everybody around isn't a cult member and they're going to look, if you start just killing random people on the street, they don't know that they're cult members and they're going to throw you out of town. There are ways to do it, but they better tie into the goals well, to stop some of the groups.
And it's really hard because most literature subverts this expectation of consequences of violence. So most of the fun literature, movies, and everything that we read, that isn't a thing that happens to our hero. Our hero freely uses violence and nothing ever happens.
And the beekeeper, where
like the beekeeper or John Wick. But the other problem is at some point, if you start humanizing all of the bad guys, even the faceless bad guys in your game is going to get depressing pretty quickly, especially if it's in a fantasy thing. If every cultist or guard comes by, and you're like, oh, they have a family with 3 kids, and you just killed them, or their kids come up screaming after you kill them, your game is different now intrinsically.
Yeah.
Why is your game is causing PTSD at that
right?
point?
Because I had somebody try and do this with a Shadowrun game once. It's well, they're not just security guards; they're people too. And it's why are we doing this job? That's what starts happening. Is
right.
Why are we these people?
Yeah, obviously the corporation is really big and bad, but I just killed Ryan, the really nice security guard, on my way to do a run, and now now I've got Ryan's kids attending a funeral, and they
Yeah.
found out who I was through the.
Yeah, Ryan worked at the food kitchen every Wednesday, and now it's like, oh, I'm not a good guy. I'm not a hero at all. And so
Yeah.
that's one of the things that's funny about this genre, especially high fantasy, is that like a hero is a hero. Like you are a, Conan type where you kick in the door and you sword fight people.
Yeah. Now, I do have to say that there's one more thing about the conflict that, how to maybe make conflicts less an option, is that they say increase the power of the opposing side, making direct conflict impossible. I always find that for whatever reason, that never seems to work with the games I played. It's just like, oh, you run into a giant golem looking thing made out of metal that seems to be unfamiliar. What do? I charge it. Oh, okay. Well, let's make this the fastest fight ever because it's challenge rating 22 and you're level 2. So let's go.
The one instance that I remember most, and I think we talked about this recently, that I remember most was that one game where I was dead set on fighting God and one of his servants, and you were like, finally, like you were like, you guys will all die if you do this, and that was the only way to get us to stop. Mm-hmm. Because like there's two things that happen in D&D games. One, every combat is one you can win, or your characters need to run away. Like you need to teach them it's okay to run away more often. Which isn't something which in some games, like the players won't get that without certain consequences.
I think it's more prevalent in OSR games because OSRs tend to be just like everything is dangerous. Assume that you could die by just going into a room. So approach with caution. Whereas in like 5th edition, your characters are fairly durable.
Well, you're heroic. Like you have to make it clear that it's not a heroic game in that case. Yeah. Like because like if it's a heroic game, you expect that I can overcome any challenge. I'm a hero. Mm-hmm. Versus like OSR games and some other games where it's like you're not a superhero though. You're just kind of a run-of-the-mill hero. Mm-hmm. I was thinking about Warhammer Fantasy where it's like, oh, I'm a knight. Yeah, but if there's 5 bandits and they're attacking you, you're dead just as much as anybody that isn't a knight. Yeah. And that's the thing that you have to remember is like if it depends, like you have to set the expectation of that game. If it's a heroic game, like you're gonna have players, and this has happened to me before, where I thought a game was a heroic game, and I thought I could, some way we could defeat any challenge we were giving them, and that wasn't the case, and we all died. And it feels bad.
To do with goblins? Is that what?
Yeah, that was that game. Yeah, that was that game. And that feels kind of bad a little bit. Yeah. I was like, oh, I didn't understand that I couldn't overcome this challenge.
Yeah, and that's a little bit tricky to like, as the DM and the player to be like, okay, well, I want you to know that your character would recognize that this is a very lethal situation to get into. So you may wish caution, because like as soon as the GM says that, it's almost like a weird like, oh, you think I'm not smart enough to know how dangerous it is? I'm going to do it just to spite you, Mr. GM. But
I don't do that when my GMs say that. I feel like they're trying to help me survive a little bit. Like be aware that maybe everything you encounter in this world isn't going to be a thing that you can overcome with violence.
Right.
Yeah. But I think that's also good to like make sure that people do have that understanding, because I feel like if everything can be solved with violence, it gets a little stale pretty quick. So
it does.
We do have one last chapter in this. Did you guys have anything else about conflicts that really stood out to you?
I did, just really quick. I did like that they had a list of different things like for non-combat encounters to, stop them from dragging on, like obtaining a promise, extracting an apology, get permission. My favorite one was win a race, right?
Yeah.
Like I know it's not a 100-yard dash, right?
but
it could be.
But it could be. It could be. 100% could be, right?
Yeah.
Well, but you can have fun with that. Like I remember running a game that was taking place in Eberron, and I had 3 players in that game. This is actually one that you guys were not in. It was a little before we gamed a lot together, but the game started by just simply like having different groups and chasing down a griffin's egg. Like you had to go up to this nest of griffins, and each group had to go get up to it. And it was a series of skill challenges and everything like that. And by getting a griffin's egg, the first one back won, basically, right? It was a race. It was fun. I had a lot of fun totally ruining it for him, but that's okay. But the point was, is that it was a fun non-combat encounter to kind of like, well, how do we get this damn griffin egg? So from the Erie or whatever they're called. But,
right. Yeah.
Yeah. So, treasure, the biggest motivator of any tabletop RPG. What I thought was ironic about that, I think this is the shortest chapter in the book. Like,
well, yeah, but
like
I know, but it sort of makes sense because it's the culmination, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like everything else is how you lead up to here and tying all these things into the goals, right? And in some cases, that reward, like the magic circlet of healing to stop the plague, right? The treasure is the goal in some cases.
Yeah.
Right? Destroying the One Ring is the goal.
Yep.
Although that's losing treasure, so that's how unrealistic that story is, right?
It's what it is.
I'm kidding.
It's the feelings you acquire after the fact. But it is interesting because I think they talk about in this is that the one thing that they kind of mentioned right out of the gate is that there are two ways in proactive games to think about rewards. One is function, one is form. The function of reward is the effect it has on gameplay. It could signal the completion of a goal, introduce a new goal or story element, or just be a nice find unrelated to the story. The form of a reward is what type of loot it is: a magic item, useful information, real estate, cold hard cash, etc. Not every reward you create has to tie into your greater network of goals and consequences, but creating rewards that encourage the style of play you want at your table will ensure what you get. And what's hilarious about this, and what hit me about that, is just like, what is this, corporate time again? You incentivize the behaviors that you want to see in your players. I believe I've experienced
it's like parenting, Mike, right?
Yeah.
Isn't DMing just like parenting?
It must be.
Reward the good behaviors.
It is, because it's a very true statement. It's very, very honestly like a realistic thing that people need to know if they don't. Like if you encourage people by giving them all like weapons, like you get a weapon +5 if you kill this one mob, then you're going to kill every mob because you want, weapons, right? You want cool loots. But if you change it and you change the way that your rewards are structured around their goals, and I think they did a pretty smart job of saying that, sometimes the goal completion is part of the reward. I thought that was a good way to tie it back to the actual process they're encouraging here. What did you guys think about this section?
I liked it. I kind of liked the concept, and as a player, I shouldn't. But the building consequences as +1s, right? Negotiation or compromise. The party gets what they want, but they have to give up something else. The Pyrrhic victory, right? Yep. They win, but the cost is so great that it wasn't really worth it. And then the double cross, right? That's always the best. And well, we love the double cross in books and movies, right? Because that's what gives you the sequel.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know. I think that I've thought about all of the things in this chapter, but I don't think I thought about them in the way that they were lined out. Does that make sense?
True.
Sorry. I kind of liked it. The function and form helps, break it down. I don't know what these magic items they were talking about were. I've gamed with Mike for a long time and never seen a magic item.
Never asshole.
Every goal of every character from now on: find a magic sword.
What, you've seen magic items? They just happen to be in shops.
Yeah, we don't want to save the
price outside your budget.
We just want magic swords.
Well, the funniest part is we probably see magical items and then we didn't do anything with them.
We didn't pick them up. We didn't search the right.
We just kept them in our backpack and gave them to someone else, like everything we've done in the Age of Worms campaign.
Hey, Age of Worms! I gave you so many magic items; it was ridiculous. I gave
everything to the garrison. Yeah.
Yeah, I was like, wow, this is what it feels like to give away magic items and then have you not take any of them. Amazing.
Well, again, I'm one of those weird players, like where like completion of the adventure is usually like like I feel is rewarding. So like it has to be
Mhm.
really obvious if it's a
Yeah, I
if it's a
thought Brett was
magical
playing
item.
his character though. Like, is you know what I mean? Like,
Well,
I
that's the
thought he
thing is
was.
all my character's fairly dumb when it comes to that stuff. So
No,
Well,
but
I didn't mean it like that.
no, he is though.
hey, well, this is what I find interesting though, is that according to what the suggestions in here and the way that in the worldview of proactive role playing, all the rewards in that dungeon were not good rewards because they weren't tied to anything, other than you just going into a place and
Right.
finding stuff.
Exactly.
And so you guys had zero connection to it. So when your character was like, I found this shit in a cavern.
Here you
Looks like
go.
it's still usable. Do you want to see if the quartermaster can give it to people that need it?
Yeah,
And, like,
exactly.
that is 100% in character for how you were
Yeah,
behaving.
and 100% points to that part of this book.
Well,
It's like, yeah,
yeah, and it does. It reinforces the book. Like it really does. Like
Mhm.
Age of Worms, as great as it is, wasn't written to be super proactive. It was
No.
written at a different time for a different system with different rules of play. And
Yeah, and it feels like if you go into it with a different expectation, Jeff's character got a lot out of the cavern because his goal that we had said at the beginning was to get information about the ancient civilization that lived there. So he was making chalk markings, drawings, and all that stuff. And when Brent's getting loot, he's just like, "Oh, cool! What a novelty! Let's take it back and hope these bodies don't." The number of people with this weird 8-pointed star seems to be strange.
now we knew that was a big deal.
yeah, we knew it was a big deal. We just
We don't know what that big deal is.
Exactly, but my point is you're like, well, there's a lot of people here, and they have some
I
pretty
don't
good
need to
loot.
take a 200-year-old rotten scrap of cloth back with me.
It's true. It's true. No, it was good though, because I think it actually, I think for me, like, if you design good goals and everything like that, and you can have rewards that make sense for it. I mean, it seems like an easy, like very linear progression to get from this idea that a reward should be designed around a goal, because but I also feel that, like, again, back to your earlier point, if you design everything around their goals, then there's no real there's no surprise to it, right? And I think that many of the games where I've had more interesting things is where you've had those surprise things that have changed the game in ways that either I as a DM or you as a player didn't anticipate. So I think that there's a little bit of a balance that has to be struck where that,
Absolutely.
as you're an adventurer, you kind of want to go for the unknown too, especially if that's one of your goals, is to amass a fortune. You don't want to know every little piece of fortune you're going to amass. You want to kind of just go out and find stuff that could be interesting in its own right.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we've come to the conclusion about the chapters so far that we've read is, like, all of them are good suggestions, but you definitely have to apply other game master logic to it too. Like, you can't just look at this book, read this book, and say, okay, this is how I'm running my game from now on. I'm doing all these things all the time, because that's what you're going to get. One, you're going to get overwhelmed for sure. Like, it's not going to make the game any easier for you, I don't think. And two, everything's just going to be, oh, you find your sword, move on to the next goal. Like, it's just going to start being a checklist. Whereas like that organic storytelling is I think important, and the point of role playing, really.
Yeah.
And if your character doesn't like, but yeah, if we think about Brahmin, like Age of Worms, like, and part of this is the, like, my sense of how I play games now, just be based on the other games that we played that aren't D&D. Like, just finding a sword and it being fancy is probably not going to make my character want to use it, unless somebody, like, says, oh, I think this sword might be magic. You're probably going to have better with it than without it, or you're going to need it to slay the dragon or something like that. My character's probably going to be like, nah, I'm good with my axe, because you're right, it's not tied to my character at all.
Yeah, your trusty axe has been there through thick and thin. And where's this sword been? You don't know. You're not going to cheat on your axe with this sword, even if it does look fancy.
I did also like the concept of information being a prize, being a reward, because oftentimes it's not the thing that everybody gets excited about, right? It's not the magic item, it's not the loot, it's not the completing the quest, but it's the thing that leads to something better, right? It's that hope that there's something better after the next adventure, or
it could be
if you have this long-term goal of doing something, it's the next piece in the puzzle, right?
But I do think that is a good. I think information is good, but it's better when the players are excited about the information. So
Yes.
like
Well,
when we were playing that,
it has to tie into the goal, right, Mike? That's the whole point of the book. Like,
yeah. So, but if the players
need
are
to have
excited
the
about the
goal.
information and they go, "Oh shit, it is Duke," it is the Duke. He's behind the plots. You're like, "Whoa!" You have that moment. That's cool stuff. But yeah, I think that if you're playing reactionarily and you just like fed that, then you're like, "Oh, it's the Duke," and you're like, "Oh, okay, who cares?" Like. There's two very different reactions to that.
Well,
information
you might be surprised, but it definitely has less value if it hasn't been built up.
Yeah. So okay. Well, I think that's the conversation for this. As we've said so far, we've been enjoying reading it. I think that there's no perfect book for how you can run your game, but so far parts 1 and 2 have proven to have some very interesting components to it. And I'm really sorry for people that are looking at my copy of the book. Brent, you should bring your copy out so they can actually see the legit one. It's too far away. Okay.
It's across the room. Yeah.
But battle tested, you can tell that we've been reading it. But the idea is that I think this has at least some good inspirational stuff for you to think about with your games. I think, it's actually not very expensive. Like I think I got it on sale for like $10 off Amazon or something like that. So like for a book that was $10, it's not a very long read. I think it's so far in parts 1 and 2, it's really cleverly done and gives you enough to think about for your own games that, again, just like as you play different games, you kind of cannibalize what you want out of that game and take it with you forever. Same thing with this. I think there's enough little pieces of information in here that you can use to improve your game that it's a worthy endeavor.
There's a lot of good so far.
Yeah, both things that'll make you think and both things that are good reminders.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And we do have part 3 and overall thoughts at the end, which I think our overall thoughts will be probably pretty easy to summarize on this, based on, unless something changes very drastically in the part 3 that is just like, oh, we hate this book. So look for part 3 coming in a week near you. So that's my final thoughts. You guys have anything else you want to throw in there before we wrap up?
No, I'm good.
Okay. All right. Well, then send us off. Jeff, how do they contact us? So first of all, if you have read the book and you want to leave your comments below, put it below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. We want to know how people are improving their own games. What other books would you recommend us read? Obviously, if you made it to this part of the episode, we really appreciate your time. You're listening all the way through. We appreciate it very, very, very much.
We do.
But if they want to contact us otherwise, Jeff, how would they do that?
They would find us on Facebook, Threads, or Twitter. We are at Rollwise. You can email us, rollwiseguys@gmail.com as well. And if you made it this far, really help us out. Give us a like, maybe sub, maybe click the bell, all the YouTube stuff so that we can keep growing.
Yeah, please share the podcast with anybody that you get to listen to it. We're trying to reach our goal of 500 subscribers as soon as possible. So please share us around. If you think somebody would enjoy us, or if you can force somebody to sub, please do. And as always, roll well, roll wise, and be safe out there. Thank you, everybody.
See you.